We saw combinators. Now combinators something when you combine two classes or two elements. So basically any selectors, if you combine that, that is combinators. Now let's not confuse ourselves with combinators and what we're going to see now. So this video is about pseudo classes. We have a huge list of pseudo classes. Let's look at that. Let me remove this one. So we have this div list already, but let me create this now. So hover over is the text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a style to it, which says on hover. I believe you all saw the hover property of links. Now, likewise, even you could hover on a div. Now, this is what after the colon, what you see is called the pseudo classes. Now, the pseudo classes are pretty much a state of the element. So when you hover, that is a different state. When you don't hover, that's a different state. So we'll say background color becomes red. Now this is also a div, that is why it gets red. See, when I mouse over, it gets red. Now likewise, there are so many pseudo classes. That is what I have listed here. We'll look at one after the other. Now you might all remember the pseudo classes of link. Let's have a link here. Let me disable this. Now whatever we do here, I mean, this is applicable for all kind of selectors. Even for class selectors, this is applicable. So you could just give a class name and say div1. Say hover. So when you hover, this property takes effect. So I could simply have a element selector this time. So let's see what happens. Color is white. Likewise, we have other properties. So I have all these four properties. We'll just change the pseudo classes. Sorry, this should be the order. And let's look at what happens. Before that, let me give a gap. Let's look at it. So the pseudo class number one, link, which is unvisited. If the link is not visited, if we haven't clicked on it before, it should be in blue color. And if I have visited, I'm saying that it has to be in blue color too. So that's why it's in blue color. So however, I say that font size has to be bold. When you do a mouse over, the font size becomes bold and the color changes, and when it is active the color becomes black. That's what you see. Or let me change it to red so that we could see the difference. See? Okay, that works. Now that's with the anchor tags and it is pseudo classes. So there's one more property. Remember target. Let me get some lorem ipsum text. Just get some dummy text like this. I'll just try to fill this page. Just want to see a scrolling effect. That's it. I'll give an ID to this div. Bottom. Say scroll till here. Now I'll have one of the tags to say href bottom. Take me to the bottom. So what this does is there is a anchor tag. When you click on this anchor tag, it takes you to whichever div that has this ID bottom. So when you click here, it goes to the bottom. So it shows you the bottom. The page can't scroll anymore. That's why you just see it till here. If the page has any content below it, it will try to move to this top. Shouldn't be there. Yeah. So when you click here, it takes you to the target, but the target gets to have the style that we have mentioned here. So you don't need to mention the anchor here because the property that is applied to the target, not on the anchor. The hover property that you saw for div, you could also use it in an effective way. Let's create a div and call it invisible. Like we have a display property, inline block and inline block. There is also one more property called display none. Now what this does is it pretty much hides the content. So what happened is initially the display is none for this div. So you don't see that div here. But when I do a mouse over, so div1 hover. So when you do a mouse over, this class, so which is that div, gets this properties. See? So this is one effective way of using the hover. The link part is done. Now we'll focus on some input tags. I'm gonna have a input type text. Okay. So with this, you could have properties like input disabled. You could say color is, or background color, or say border color. I'm gonna have two input tags here. One is disabled, the other is not. We have two input tags. This is disabled, so you can't enter any text, but this is not disabled. So any tag which is disabled, apply the style is what it says. Again, when it comes to input tag, you could specifically say whether it is input text, or it is a radio button, or it is a checkbox, all that. So it depends on what you select here. So if you just select text box, this effect is applicable only for all the input text box. If you select radio button, it is applicable only for the radio button. Enabled is simply where you don't have the disabled property. So you see the black border here and the red border here. So that's the disabled and enabled pseudo classes. And then you have something called focus. I'll remove this off for time being. We'll see on another property, which is the focus. So there shouldn't be any gap between the pseudo class. So in focus, let me say the background color is red when you focus. So I'm gonna focus this text box. I'm gonna focus this text box now. So whichever text box you focus, that gets the background color of red based on the pseudo class property. Next would be in range. So you could say you have a number. Now the minimum and the max value is 5 and 10. So let me remove this input focus. Instead, I'm going to say in range and out range. So in range, let it get the green color. Out of range, let it get a red color. Let me give a default value of 7. So this is in range. That is why you get to see the green color. Now let me give 11. So that's out of range. Or say 3, that is also out of range. Now if you look at the style.css, the in range values are green. The back this property is applied, whereas out of range this property is applied. Valid and invalid. So let's say you have a type email. I'm gonna say valid and invalid. So this is an invalid value, whereas now when you give add gm, it becomes a valid value for a email. So it looks for valid values and invalid values. Based on that, these properties are applied. Let me take this out. Again, you can try all this with class select as too. So let's say you have two text boxes, but if one text box is required in the sense this text box says that this value, this is a mandatory value. You have to enter value into this. You might have seen in login forms and registration forms, some text box are required. So this is that kind of a text box. So if it is required, you see the background color red, or whichever property you mention. And there's another property called read only. So for the read only pseudo class, again you could say read only in the sense you can't make any changes to it. You can just read, but you can't change the content. You can't change anything here. Now let's look at the pseudo class called empty. Let's say you have a div tag which is empty, and you have other div tags too. So if you say div tag, or say some selector, or even the class selector, and then say empty, so there is a div here which is empty, so that got this background color blank. But if you're wondering why this div didn't get the black, it's because it doesn't has any height. Now without any content, that div is basically a single line of element, but this has style of height 200 pixels. So if you give the same here, even this div is gonna have that. So anything that doesn't has any child element or even text, so that will take this property. That's what empty is for. I can remove this. Now comes the bit complex part, for which I'll prepare some divs. Let's go for a cleaner code. Let's have multiple divs and multiple para. This is para 1. This is para 2. This is para 3. Let me have a few more divs inside. And then again some para. This is para 4. And 1 and para 6. So with this, let me show you what is this first child. Take this all out. Okay. So if I say div which is an element selector, or I could even have any class selectors, and then say first child, div first child, or I think since we have so many para, I would say para first child, background colors green. What happens is wherever paragraph is the first child, see now there are 3 paragraphs. This paragraph is the first child, so this is green. This paragraph is the first child to this div, so that's also green. But this paragraph is not the first child. Let me arrange this better. So this paragraph is not the first child. Okay, so that's first child. So it look for this element. Now, what if I give class equal to P1 this is to show that this is applicable even for the classes. If you see this class one, you would look only for the classes now and not for the paragraph. So this class P1 and P1, among these two P1, this is the first child. So that is why this is applicable for the first child. Let me remove this second last child. So if you look at it, for this div, okay, let's look from this div. For this div, this is the last child, yeah? So you have a span and then the paragraph. For this div, this is the last child, para 5. But for this div, there are 3 paragraphs and then there is 2 divs. So any of these paragraph is not the last child. So these 3 are not, they don't get these properties applied. You could use italic tags. I'm going to use some italic tags. First italic. Second italic. Within paragraph tags, if you find the italic tag, select the first italic tag. So let me disable this first so that you could see what's happening here. So you have first italic and second italic. But when you unhide the code, in all the paragraphs, so let me have more italics here. So in all the paragraphs, select the first italic child. So this paragraph, there are like 2 italic child, just select the first one and here select this first one. So that's what is happening here. Now I'll change the order. Here we say the first P element should have all its italic tags being applied with this property. Nothing happens because the first paragraph is this and there is no italic tag inside. So that is, the previous one was, let me show it again. All the paragraphs within that, you have to see where this pseudo clause is applied. So it is applied on I. So with all the paragraph tags, apply this to the first child of italic. But whereas here, the first paragraph tag, but apply this property to all its italic. So before I change this, let's see what happens. Nothing happens. So this is the first paragraph now. So it applies to all the italics. I'm saying paragraph nth child 2. So it look for all the places where paragraph is the second child inside. So this paragraph is second child of this container, this parent. And this paragraph is a second child of this container. And this paragraph is the second child of this container 1 and 2. See? That's what nth child do. We have nth last child. See what this one does. Now what nth last child does is, now in a div tag, the same as nth child, nth last child counts from the bottom. So 1, 2, para 6. So from the bottom, second child, and this container 1, 2, para 5. And here we say nth child 2, right? So of this div 1, 2. So second is pretty much the div, right? It is not the para. So that is why it didn't apply the background color for the one or any other. First of type. Now this might get a bit confusing. First of type. Let's see what happens. So first of type, when you see this and the first child, okay, the only difference that you see is para 6. What first of type does is, if it is first child, then apply this property. But when you think of it, this is same as first child. Why would we have another property? Let me put it this way. I'm saying inside body, any tag which is first of its type, whether it can be div, it can be a paragraph, or it can be span. So what happens is it completely applies it, because this div, it's first of its child, right? So it is applied for all. I'm saying inside, so this symbol, you remember we saw in combinators. So anything inside body, so whichever element is first of its type, like say this div is first of its type. So I'm going to remove this. If I remove this, this paragraph is first of its type. So this paragraph got it, first italic and second italic. And then this div is first of its property. So the whole div is selected. This whole div is selected. And since the div has been already selected and applied, this div is not being considered. So if you take this pan out and keep it here, yes, this would work. But this pan inside will not work, because the div element has already been selected for applying the property. Let's see last of type. Again, when we see last of type, this is the last div. And this is the last para. So looks like it just looks for the outer element. So if the outer element is convinced, then it doesn't look for the inner element. So let's have a div here to see if that's really true. Yeah. So this is being done for the div type. Again, it doesn't want to look for another div type, so it doesn't applies. All it looks for is the paragraph now. So nth last of type typically looks for Now it look for every p element that is the second p element of its parent, counting from the last child. So of each parent, so in this parent 1 2 from the child, here 1 2 from the child, here 1 2. Yeah, so it will count from the bottom of only this type. See what nth of type does. Now it will select every p element that is second p element of its parent. So pretty much the opposite of it. Second. Now this is second. Again this is second. And this is second. So that's what it does. All these names could be a bit confusing. Now a only of type will select every p element that is a only p element of its parent, which means we have another div tag, say new para. This new para works because this is the only child of this div tag or any other tag. Now if you look at it, all the paragraphs has some siblings and this paragraph doesn't has any sibling. That is the only of type. I will also see what is only child. This applies red. We'll have something like okay, so the difference. Now, if there is only one para, so here there's only one para, there's not another para. So this property is applied for only of type. So they can be only one para, but here only child, you could even have, let me, so if you see there are like two paragraphs. So if there are two paragraphs, obviously this is not applicable. It's not applicable for both of them. But if there is some other element other than para, it works for only of type. Okay, there can be only one, there can be multiple elements inside its parent, but there can be only one para. If I have another para to it, this won't be applied. But for this only child, regardless of span or anything, see, it is a only child now. But if I put a span there, this effect will be removed. So it has to be only child. But since there is a para and a span here, this only type is applied. Now, in simple terms, only child works when there is only one child to its parent and no other tags. Whereas only of type works, they can be multiple siblings, but they can be only one para. And this is applicable for class selectors too. You could change that here. And finally, we have not. Now all the span will have this color, and all the elements that is not a span will have this color, as it is applied even on the body here. So there's so many pseudo classes that you saw, and you could combine these pseudo classes and the combinators the way you want. So there's n number of permutations and combinations you could work on.